right, so remember, talk to me, not the camera.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone again. This is Allan Lehner. Today is August 25.
It's not August.
April 25th.
Let's start again.
Okay, hi. Today's April 25th, 2019. Geez, I think about 6 years after my first interview was given to Fred, and the movie was seen a number of times. I guess this is a continuation of what has gone on in my life during that intervening period. And just to give you a little background, I left Vietnam in 1970 on an early out, and I was just ecstatic to get out of out of the Army and the war. And I ended up going back to Temple University, and I got an MBA degree. It was rather difficult transitioning directly from the battlefield to the classroom in literally 2 weeks. And after graduating, getting my MBA, I had a couple of jobs working for the city of Philadelphia, working in health maintenance organizations. But my ultimate goal was to have my own business. And I succeeded in doing that with my older brother initially. We ended up starting a business approximately in 1974, and that business continued on until it was sold, and we retired rather young. We had a third brother that came into the business, and we operated a number of retail stores and wholesale in the fireplace industry and casual furniture. So things, you know, the war when I came home was still going on. I did have still contact with it, the memories and everything else from watching the news, but very little in the way of conversation with anybody. I blended in, and even my family never really knew what had transpired in Vietnam. I got busy with my business, and it was a 24/7 career, and we started from scratch, and we had no money, and it required me to do everything along with my brothers. I didn't have time to think about Vietnam or the war. I mean, I looked at the articles in the newspaper and on the air with interest, but really no involvement, no organizations, no anti-demonstrations. I mean, the war really was coming to an end. The war disappeared from my life. I was busy having a family. I have 2 boys and a girl, and a wife, and raising a family, and getting the business growing to what we wanted it to be was a full-time endeavor. As life proceeded on, the sale of our business, the retirement to Florida, initially it was play golf all day and enjoy dining every night. And, it gets old after a while. And I began to think more about the war days and the guys that I had left behind, the memories. And fortunately, my brother, who I had written a number of my correspondence letters telling him how I felt over there and the actions I was involved in, left me with a real a biography of what I had experienced. I am indebted to him for saving all those letters, which could have been thrown away very easily. About 7 years ago, I was approached by a fellow vet asking me if I was a member of the Vietnam Veterans of America. And I told him I wasn't. I'm really not a joiner. But you know what? Maybe it's time. I had some problems, health problems, that I was going to the VA, and I thought, well, you know what? The Vietnam Veterans of America really does a lot of important things to get vets their benefits. So I said, yeah. I said, what do you want to do? He said, well, I want to start a new chapter, a local chapter for Boca Raton and Delray Beach. And I need to get 25 guys before a chapter can be recognized by the national organization. Well, I was one of the founding members of the chapter 1125, and I'm happy to say we're over 100 members, and we do a lot of good things. And but it was tough. The initial 25 was really tough to get those members, but we finally, I think it took us about 1.5 years before we got our chapter designation. And I've been an officer, the treasurer of the chapter now, probably for the last 5 years, and involved in the fundraisers and where we are placing our money to help other vets and awarding scholarships. My wife, it's my second wife. I remarried. My first wife died at a rather young age, and my wife sort of asked me questions about Vietnam, or knew about that I was in the war, and I guess in just passing comments, she put it in my mind and hers that we should go back to Vietnam. And I said, you know, I have mixed emotions about that. I did not know what to expect. I heard a lot of vets who went back to visit Vietnam said it was a very healing process to see the country again. I had it in the back of my mind, but we didn't act on it. It was always there that, you know, should I do this? I mean, it is one of the most haunting memories that I have had in my life, and you know, you don't forget it. And you know, curiosity, whatever. So about 3 years ago, my wife again brought up Vietnam and said, you know, we should go. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Can I ask you one question?
Okay.
What was her reasoning for bringing up Vietnam again? What was her reason that she wanted to go?
I think my wife loves to travel. And people, you know, she was never in the Far East, and she thought putting a trip together, Vietnam being the focal point, but also seeing Thailand, Cambodia, would be beneficial. We were in China previously and Hong Kong, and she honestly thought it would be good for me. She knew there's a lot of time on your hands when you're retired, a lot of time to think. You're not working. And when you think, and there are a lot of questions that, you know, go through your mind. And I think she thought it would be good to see what really has happened over there in the intervening 48 years since I was there.
Give me one question maybe you've thought about. You said there's questions in your mind while you're retired about the past. What was there one question that was haunting you, you think about all the time?
Oh, I was thinking about the people there. I think it was more the people than anything else. How they perceived us. How, if they were, you know, angry or still hated Americans, and see for myself how they were getting on their life and how we perhaps changed them for the worse. But I was surprised. I was surprised when we went over there.
Were you thinking, was guilt a factor?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. My attitude was that in war, everything is fair game. But I had guilt that, you know, the war, in the intervening time, I had seen the series on PBS, Ken Burns series on Vietnam. And although I knew there were ulterior motives for getting us involved in the Vietnam War, that series brought it to light and made me not only feel that badly and guilty about all the Americans that were sacrificed, but also all the Vietnamese that were killed or maimed in a war that should have never happened. I know there are a lot of vets that would, you know, be angry at my statement there. I mean, they hold out bitterness and everything else to the Vietnamese people, and I don't feel that way anymore.
Hold on a second.
So
Okay, I'll start now. Go ahead.
So we hopped on a flight to Vietnam, and
So now, is that the same plane that you left from Vietnam 40 years ago?
the same airport? No. And we flew over a lot better. Business class on it was a great flight over, and but we did fly into I think we flew into Hanoi first. That was the beginning, so it was a smaller plane. But my feeling was that when, I don't know what it was, I guess I had the same feeling when I went back to Japan like 25 years after I was there in 1970. And I thought that I thought Vietnam was going to look the same. I don't know what, I mean, I'm trying to envision, you know, a Vietnam that was in a time warp, sort of like Cuba, if anybody's been there. And I was surprised to find out that time marched on. My mind stopped at 1970, the way I envisioned Vietnam, but it was already roughly, I think it was 4 years ago, 2015. I can't, because initially we were up north, I can't speak about what I saw in North Vietnam because I was not there, but in general, I did see a difference between the North and the South, even though it is unified. The South seemed to be a little bit more vibrant and more maybe economically progressive than the South was. I don't know if I said the North or the South. I mean the South was seemed a little bit better off than the North. I'll mix the two, so you know, the trip and just my general feelings and thoughts. Going into the Ho Chi Minh City airport, okay, which was, by the way, the Air Force, the big Air Force at Benoit during the war. And of course, the only way I knew it was the same place was there were like a half moon concrete protection where they used to park the jets, the fighter jets during the war, so if there was rocket attacks, the planes had some protection. But it was all different. It was an airport, and going into Ho Chi Minh City, I still think of it as Saigon. It was different, very, very different. First of all, you're aware of the large number of young people. You don't see a lot of old people, maybe because they were killed during the war or whatever. You see a vibrant, youthful population, like you would see in our country, riding around on their motorbikes, walking with their iPhones and their headphones and shopping and, you know, holding hands and things like that. I expected to see a lot of maybe maimed people, you know, from the war, losing limbs and all that. I expected to see biracial people. I expected to see people that were had French blood in them from the French occupation. I didn't see that. That's not to say they weren't people of biracial background from war. A lot of them, they are, from what I've been told, they have been, they're looked down upon. whether they left the country, whether they were in other areas. I did not see any sign of it. And there certainly was a large number of biracial children from the war. The ones who were crippled, I didn't see that. Our guide, it was guided, the tour, and our guide was very good. He was in the war, and we got to speak because I was the only one on the bus who had actually been in the Vietnam War. And we spoke at length about different things. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things that he told me, or I asked him, I said, you know, are you bitter? Are the older people who fought in the war, remember the war, they bitter about what America did to them by pulling out, not supporting them at the end. He said that his age group, the ones who fought in the war, still are very angry at the American government for pulling out. And they had no idea, they thought that America would support them in the end. And it came as a complete, they were bitter and that we pulled out. And of course, you know, the North Vietnamese came in and took over. We went to, I might be jumping around. You can edit this, okay? We went to the places that tourists would normally go to. I was hoping that perhaps I could see some of the places that I had actually seen combat in, which was up near the Cambodian border. It wasn't practical. I mean, to go up there, and I would have liked to see that, but we, you know, the general feeling though was that the country was cleaned up. Just flying over the country, we had to take some internal flights, and just flying over it, there were no B-52 craters. The countryside during the war, it was pockmarked with B-52 craters. They did a very good job of filling them in. The only place I saw one, they must have kept it to show people how big they were, was near the Cu Chi tunnels outside of Ho Chi Minh City.
How about the vegetation because of the Agent Orange?
The vegetation also seems to have come back. The vegetation, I did not see the burned out areas that we flew over, it came right back. There are obviously areas where, large areas and more rural, where the people are suffering the effects of Agent Orange, just as the soldiers that came back are having Agent Orange problems. There are a lot of deformities and things like that, but we didn't get to see them. Their new construction in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, I'll call it Saigon, I'd rather call it Saigon. It's growing. The city is, it's a big city, and A lot of activity. We went to the presidential palace there, which is still in existence, obviously, and the U.S. Their diplomatic office was there, but most of the things were gone. The hotels that I remembered are gone. It was hard. It was hard to go back close to 50 years and say, geez, where was this or where was that? And rightfully so, because my time in Saigon was very limited. Okay, I had one trip to Saigon during the war, and I, so my memories are just a couple days in Saigon. Certainly, I wasn't working and living in that city.
Let's just stop for a minute. Now, outside of that tour guide, all right, what other people did you meet and have any kind of contact with, and what do you remember about them?
We went to a small village in the south, and we were able to sit down and have a drink in the living room of the mayor of the town. The mayor was a Viet Cong during the war. So he was a nice fellow. I mean, it would be like talking to a friend back here in the States. I mean, here, the two of us on opposite sides during a war are sitting there having a drink together. That's the irony of war, I guess. And he spoke about the war, and the people are still, they have to watch what they say. It's still a communist country, and they're, it's a little guarded, their conversation. Certainly a lot of the places we were taken, both in the north and the south, the War Museum in the north and the south, the Hanoi Hilton, and the torture cells there in the Hanoi Hilton.
What was the Hanoi Hilton? Tell me about that.
Well, the Hanoi Hilton is the jail, the prison, that was originally first built by the French when they were occupying Vietnam to house the Vietnamese that were attempting to overthrow the French occupation. And the French were very brutal to the Vietnamese people. They certainly knew how to torture. And that prison was taken over then after the French were defeated by the North Vietnamese, and any downed pilot or prisoner of war, that's where McCain was taken, they were put in the Hanoi Hilton, and we saw how they lived in there and their living conditions and the torture methods employed, and it was, it was shocking. But when you went to the War Museum in the North and the South, you see a lot of communist propaganda. the Americans, they had pictures. My wife had to leave. She couldn't look at the pictures that they have there. We were displayed as real war criminals, the Americans, that we lost the war, and they showed shot down aircraft, and you know, if you had to take it with a grain of salt. I knew what to expect, you know, from, you know, previous conversations or seeing it on the site. So I took it all with a grain of salt. They're very interesting museums. The interesting thing on the outside of the museum, and the one in Saigon, is a courtyard, and in the courtyard they had American shot down, you know, a jet, helicopter, different weaponry that showed what they captured, and it was really interesting. As I said, you don't see many older people or maimed people, and there in the courtyard was this crippled Vietnamese gentleman who obviously was from the war, got crippled in the war, and he lost his legs. And he was selling brochures and pamphlets, propaganda about the imperialist Americans and that we lost the war, and you know, he wanted the tourists to buy it, and I refused to buy it. I went up to him and I offered him money, but I didn't want his, you know, pamphlets or books. And the interesting thing was that, I thought it was interesting, he refused the money. He turned away and wouldn't accept it, and it was like, if you can't take a book for the money, I don't want your money. And it was quite surprising.
Do you think he acted that way because he really was trying to act dignified, or do you think he was concerned as being watched?
No, I think he harbored remembering the war, and he didn't want the pity maybe that taking money represented. I don't know.
When you take his money, it's like he's forgiving you.
Yeah. And I didn't get the impression that he was going to offer forgiveness. He looked like the war was still in his...
There were a lot of Vietnamese, thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands, that were injured by bombs, by napalm, by the defoliants. And they had to be your age.
That's right.
They're still living.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Well, that's a good question. They could be in rural areas. We didn't go to a lot of rural areas. I mean, Vietnam is a big country, and a lot of agriculture, you know, and the rice. They could be living in areas that tourists aren't visiting. I didn't see a large...
Maybe is it think the government doesn't want people to see them because...
I think that's probably true.
A benefit to the government?
I think that's true.
They want to see young people, like you say, vibrant?
I think you're right. I think that's an accurate decision as to where they are. I think I was looking also, one thing I remembered in Saigon when I was there during the war was the boat people. That the river there was just full of these boats and slums. But of course the boat people left. There was, I forget the year that flotilla left the country, and
They went to where?
I'm not sure where they went. I think they went somewhere else in Asia. But they just left. Now also, the biracial people, I think a large number of them must have left too. Where they settled, I don't know. Now I know that a lot of the children that were fathered by the French, a lot of them ended up in France. And I think if they weren't pure Vietnamese, I think they were ostracized, belittled, and they probably felt maybe we go someplace where we're not seen so much, or we leave the country if we're able to. It was we were up in Hanoi. Of course, as I said, I was not there during the war, but we stayed at the famous hotel there. I think it was the Hilton, if I'm not mistaken, not the Hanoi Hilton, but.
By the way, the Hanoi Hilton. What is it? What is it called?
It's not the Hilton. It was the one that.
I mean, the Hanoi Hilton.
Yeah. It is the prison.
What was it called there? It wasn't called that, was it?
Yeah, well, they might have had, they called it, we know it as the Hanoi Hilton. But there was a hotel, oh gosh, I can't remember, my wife should be here. But the hotel we stayed at in Hanoi was where actually the president had a meeting there with the North Korean dictator. That hotel in Hanoi, Kim, North Korea.
North Korean president.
Yeah. Okay. It was the hotel. Recently, yeah. And and we stayed there. It's a 5-star hotel. But the interesting thing is that they showed us the bomb shelter there when Hanoi was bombed during the war, and outside are the covers that the plates over on the sidewalk that they would open up, and they would have anti-aircraft machine guns there to shoot down the planes. That is also where Jane Fonda and the other war, peaceniks there that didn't want the war to go on. Jane Fonda stayed at that hotel. Her picture with sitting in an airplane, a machine, a rifle to shoot down airplanes. That picture was famous. Her picture's on the wall along with Joan Baez and Tom Hayden inside the hotel. And I was angry. I was angry, and because they were just absolutely wrong in what they did, and I, to this day, cannot watch anything with Jane Fonda, and she is bitterly hated by most Vietnam vets, and rightfully so. But I thought it was interesting that the hotel was still operating with the pictures of these anti-war people from the States here. Another interesting thing was we went down, oh, this is interesting too. We went to, we went to Da Nang and to Hue. Da Nang, I was not in that area. Da Nang was a big military installation, a lot. The war, I believe that's I Corps, 1 Corps, and heavy fighting in that area. Da Nang now is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, we stayed at a resort right near China Beach. That's where it was located, near Da Nang, in Da Nang. And the resort was absolutely the finest you could stay at anywhere. But what was really interesting was when we went to Hue. Hue is an imperial city. They got the walled city is very old, very sacred to the Vietnamese people, and that's where the Tet had the heaviest fighting going on. The citadel, which is in Hue, which houses all the, it's like a city within the city. The citadel is surrounded by a walled fence, a stone wall, and there's water. And the heaviest fighting was taking place within the walls. Well, what I saw was a city that was just like you would expect an old city to look like, a tourist city, that there was no sign of any destruction. The only thing you saw was the entranceway to the city had a lot of bullet holes in it. Hue, if you go back and look at pictures, the citadel was destroyed. It was leveled, and it is rebuilt just the way it was. And I was just shocked because I thought it would be, it was like pictures you would see of Berlin during the bombing. You'd say, how can they restore a lot of the old buildings? But they did. We also went to the Cu Chi tunnels, where it's outside of Saigon. I did not fight in that area, but they were vast tunnel complexes that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, they basically underground cities, and the Americans had to go in and, get them out, tough fighting. Where I was up in the Cambodian border area of Tay Ninh, the Fish Hook and the Dog's Head for those military buffs. And for the most part, although I did see Tay Ninh City, it was really under control. Most of what I saw was thick jungle and no civilians, free fire zone, which means that anyone was fair game. We had no restrictions on us, and as a result, it was a cat and mouse game, as opposed to people who soldiers who operated closer to Saigon, perhaps, or down in the Delta, or near Hue, where they had more contact with civilians and villages, and it was tough fighting.
So when you were in a jungle area?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you imagine yourself?
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, that's interesting also. I was pooped, okay, from the, the trip was somewhat strenuous, and the heat was typical Vietnam heat, humidity, and I said to my wife, I said, I don't know how I had done it. I was, 25 years old when I was over there. I could never imagine doing that, at this stage of life. I mean, it is really hard, to operate in an environment like that, a war.
Your equipment?
My equipment, the dog's equipment, in thick jungle. It was horrible. I mean,
about what you were stepping on? You were worried about what you were stepping on?
Well, we had to be worried about that.
Who was around the next?
Well, that was basically what we were, went out with units to hopefully give early warning of an ambush, or any kinds of booby traps.
And how long did you do that for? How many?
I was over in Vietnam for approximately 6 months.
And you couldn't take it for an hour now, is that right?
Oh, no. And I think I might have mentioned it in the first video. I don't know, but there were, back then, it was so tough. Just operating in that environment, and then worried about getting shot at on top of it, and there were times you said, you're better off getting a bullet and be done with it than putting up with this. I always, it's not funny because it happens to a lot of guys over there. You say, geez, you go through a whole tour and get shot, killed on your last mission. That's a bummer. I mean, but it was miserable conditions. If it wasn't hot, it was pouring rain on you, and the scorpions, the red ants, and the snakes. There were a lot of ways you could lose it.
Just like Florida, right?
Yeah, just like Florida. Go on with things, and you really not reconnecting, and he calls me out of the clear blue. We both belong to the same association, the Vietnam Dog Handlers Association, and he's a member, and he calls me up out of the blue. This was about 3 years ago, and we're talking and everything, and it was like, real deja vu, and that was before I had gone back to Vietnam. And about this past winter, he came down up at the Panhandle with his wife, and I drove up Panhandle, Florida, and I drove up to see him. I spent stayed the night at his place, and we were just talking, and it was like, oh my God, it was 50 years that we hadn't seen each other. And he brought out pictures that I was not aware he had taken, and he had pictures with the girls that came into the hooch and the other guys. There's one really good picture I have that he took. I'll show it to you because he took it. I said, how in the world did you take it? Because it was taken the night before I was to go out on a new mission. And you could see I'm thinking about the next day, and it's in my hooch there in base camp. And but it was he's going to move down here, and it just a great experience seeing him again, and he told me about what happened to guys in the unit, and he had gone out of the field. He left. He didn't leave Vietnam until about I think about 4 months after I had left, and he told me that the fellow, a new handler, took over his dog. He was given rear duty to protect his butt, I guess, and that handler had his old dog was killed in a firefight, and the handler got shot too, and he never did find out what happened to him, if he survived or not.
Hold on a second.
Hey, at this stage of the game.
Now, we're now reflect on then and now, but then 40, 50 years ago and now.
Well, 6 years ago, I questioned the war when I came back, questioned the motives, and half-heartedly, I went on with my life and tried to forget the event. And I said that back then there was a different that you don't have today. I'm the last of the drafted soldier, the drafted army. Now it's all, volunteer. And we thought we were raised, I was certainly raised to do what was the right thing to, our parents taught us about, America being good to us, and that we had to, I guess, get involved for whatever reasons we were told. So I said, yeah, and I closed the video. I was, I guess, firm in saying, yeah, I would serve my country again if I was called upon. Today, after seeing the country years later, and maybe older, wiser, and more information coming out about the war, the Ken Burns series, I would have to say that I would probably question more of what our reason is to go to war, as opposed to just go carte blanche if the government said you have to go. There has to be more reason to our involvement. And today, more than ever, it seems to be what are we accomplishing? Certainly, there are just wars. I mean, if our security is at stake, our country, yes, you have to do what your country asks you to do. But to go fight in a foreign country, halfway across the world, or the Middle East or whatever, I would question it. I would question it. And I would certainly question or not be in favor of my children or grandchildren going off to war for the wrong reasons. That's it.